This is Sarah Brings with the Professor Podcast, the podcast of your professors, their research, and their academic lives here at St. Thomas. This week, we're delighted to have Dr. Gleason, Professor of Music here at St. Thomas. Welcome, Professor Gleason.
Thank you, Ms. Brings. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. So to begin, could you tell us a little bit about your research and your background and how that kind of led you to where you are today?
Sure. So I'm professor of music. I teach graduate courses in music education and undergraduate courses in music history. I've been here a little while. I think I'm starting my 27th year, I think. So I started my career as a high school band, choir, director, elementary music, but all along the way I've been studying military music history, which stems from my Master of Arts degree at the University of Minnesota. And I studied the Royal Artillery Mounted Band. So I've been studying military music, but within that, I typically within the cavalry bands that were on horseback. Well, after teaching for a while, this is quite a while ago, I decided to join the Army myself and ended up in Berlin at the end of the Cold War. And that's what the book that we're going to be talking about, that's what it's about.
That's great. All right. So you recently had your book, War Cadence, come out. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a bit about what that process have looked like of putting your book together and publishing it?
Another good question. So I knew that I had a story to tell. I had kept photographs of those years between 1988 and 1991. And so I initially had done a Shutterfly book because I thought I should get my memories in place. Well, Shutterfly at the time, and maybe they still do, they have the maximum number of pages a person can do is 111 pages. So I did that, let it set for a couple of years, and realized I had tons more information, a lot more photographs, and quite a bit more story. And I was connected with a book designer, Renee Elena, who I ended up working with for 4.5 years. And while I was, I'm a fairly capable writer, putting images together with a book, that's a completely different task and a different skill set. So I would write individual chapters, send her the Word documents, send her photographs, and then she would put the chapters together. So 4.5 years later, we had a book, and of course we did drafts back and forth. I think chapter 4 itself, I think it was 26 drafts. We would have things together, and then I would think of something more that probably should be said or changed or edited or something. And I initially was going to publish this myself, but we ended up being able to publish it through Calumet Editions, which is a publisher here in the Twin Cities.
Nice. And from my understanding, a lot of this book recounts your lived experience throughout your time in the Army in Berlin.
Yes.
At the time, did you know what you were witnessing was so monumental?
Wow. I knew it was monumental. Getting to Berlin, but after basic training at Fort Dix, New Jersey, then there's the School of Music at the Norfolk Amphibious Base, where the Navy, Marines, and Army train their musicians together. And then I got my assignment a couple of weeks before I was headed to Berlin. Well, Berlin was still a walled-off city at the time. Things really hadn't changed in 40-some years. It never occurred to me that the wall would be opening up and that the German reunification would be happening during my enlistment there. So there were a lot of surprises along the way, and fortunately, I was able to capture those. I wrote newspaper articles, so I guess I did have an idea that I was living an interesting life. North Star News in Carlsted, Minnesota, up near where I taught up in the Red River Valley. They're the ones who published those articles. So there are 30 JPEGs of those articles throughout the book.
Wow.
So I guess I did sort of have an inkling that I was living history.
So we have the book in front of us now. Could you walk us through it a little bit and maybe highlight any sections that you find particularly interesting or that might have a good story behind them?
Sure. I yes, I grew up in a musical family. All four of my sisters, everyone played the piano. We were all in band. We were all in choir. Both of my parents were musicians. My mother was a classically trained pianist. My father was a good singer, played harmonica. But we were also athletic. We had good growing up years. So within that, the first chapter has to do with my upbringing, and there are photographs in here that we can possibly show later. Then it moves on to when I was teaching in Kennedy, Minnesota, and Kennedy is way north. It's about 7 hours northwest of here. It's 3 hours north of Fargo, if that helps you.
That's north.
Yeah, it's north. It's just a couple of inches from Canada, and so I taught there for 6 years. It was a fabulous way to start a career. And then from there, I was working on my master's degree down here at the University of Minnesota during that time. And then when I finished the master's degree, that's when I enlisted. I was older enlisting. I was 30 going through basic training, which I don't know that I would do that again, but it's over. So there's an entire chapter on basic training. We, of course, were not allowed to have cameras in basic training, but they missed mine when I was handing in all of my civilian gear. So I snapped a couple of photos during just in the barracks. And this, of course, is years before cell phones, so that wasn't even a part of the deal. Then there's a chapter on the School of Music. Then we're on to Berlin. And because our compound, Andrews Barracks, was originally built as a Prussian military academy, the Hauptkadettenanstalt, main cadet installation. There are photographs that the Bundesarchives supplied for the book, and then there are then in the 1930s and 40s, that same compound was a Nazi compound, and there are photographs there as well that I secured from the Bundesarchiv. Then there are plenty of photographs of the jobs we did: marching, concert band. We had a fabulous big band, jazz. We had a great rock band. A lot of accomplished. Well, we were all accomplished musicians. And then I do some. There are chapters on our travel as well. We would travel to West Germany. Remember, Berlin is in the middle of East Germany, so it was 100 miles to the border. So there are photographs of the duty train that we would take at night, getting through Soviet checkpoints and so on. And I did a lot of traveling myself through Denmark, West Germany, France, Spain, Portugal, Luxembourg. And because my youngest sister was living in Indonesia, I flew to Indonesia, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. And there are chapters on everything. Fortunately, and I don't know why I did this, I saved photographs of everything. I saved documentation. I saved train tickets. I saved all of my orders, which was really handy if I was going to put a book together.
Very handy. You were planning ahead.
I was planning ahead.
Having witnessed some very important events in contemporary history, I remember you mentioning in the class that I took with you that you were there when the Berlin Wall came down.
Yeah.
Has that affected the way that you observe and understand current events?
You've done a really good job in preparing questions. I suspect so. The Berlin Wall opening up was a complete surprise to us. We didn't know anything more than anyone in the United States. That night that the Berlin Wall opened, we received a phone call at the band building saying the Berlin Wall is opening. I was downstairs getting my mail. I suspected that there's no possible way that's correct. Dan Eason, who is now a minister, I think last I knew he was in Alaska, saxophone player. We decided that we should probably head to the Berlin Wall in case this actually was true. We called Dave Slothauer, one of our trumpet players who just retired as a school superintendent in Calhan, Colorado. Dave, we just got a message saying that the Berlin Wall is opening. So he picked us up. We dashed to Checkpoint Charlie, and by the time we got to Checkpoint Charlie, there were three East German guards standing in the middle of Friedrichstrasse at Parade Rest. They probably knew just as much or just as little as we did. There were people gathering. We realized that nothing was happening right at Checkpoint Charlie. We drove around to Invalidenstrasse, to near the Brandenburg Gate. By the time we got to the Brandenburg Gate, the Tom Brokaw and the NBC cameras were broadcasting to the world, and we were watching people stream through the opening that had been made.
Wow.
It was a doozy. And I'm actually not even answering your question. Sorry about that. That weekend of that opening, there were scores of people, of course, coming through, and people who are old enough to remember that West Berliners were bouncing on the cars coming through, just as a matter of celebration. There are still plenty of YouTube videos on that. And as far as, and it was then a year later that it was announced that, well, at some point the German reunification manifested, and then there was an announcement that the capital of the reunified country would be returned to Berlin. East Berlin was the capital of East Germany, but Bonn was the capital of West Germany, and it would all be bound together. So the idea of world events, I'm reminded that the world is smaller than I think it is, but it's also still a huge place. In figuring out how to connect people with one another in positive ways, I look forward to seeing how humans do that. We're not always good at that.
Not always. So when you're a historian and you're doing research, it's quite different than the research that would take place in a lab. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you find particularly challenging when you're working on your books or you're conducting some sort of research that we might not always think about?
Yes. And you and I were talking earlier. My next book is in the works now. My first book, Sound the Trumpet, Beat the Drums, Horse-Mounted Bands of the U.S. Army, 1820 to 1940, had complications, but one part was I was dealing with U.S. museums and galleries and very noted European museums. So when it came to needing images and permission to publish those images, things were a little were straightforward, and it was relatively simple. I didn't always think they were simple, but now that I'm working on the next book, cavalry trumpeters and kettle drummers and and the birth of the mounted band from the Crusades to the 20th century, which is actually a prequel to my first book, working with museums and galleries now, and all of them are European. Some are very easy. The British Museum and British Library, Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris is simple. The Smithsonian here in the United States is easy. They have a simple format. Sometimes they don't even need a form. The cost is negligible. Then there are museums and galleries that are not easy. The State Historical Museum in Moscow, for instance. It's the first time that I've ever needed a letter of introduction from my superior here at the St. Thomas explaining who I was. That's a first. The Military Museum in Istanbul, their idea for me to connect with, I was there several years ago and took photographs of some drums, 15th century that had been used in the battle when Constantinople became Istanbul. So these are historic drums. I took photographs of those, but now to get permission to actually publish the photos, that's a whole different tap dance. Their idea was for me to walk into the embassy in Washington D.C. and have them connect with the Department of Defense in Istanbul, and we haven't quite figured that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Because a casual DC trip is
Right.
just
Yeah.
that simple.
Yes. Europeans, I've been dealing with entities in Europe for a long time, and their idea about travel is considerably different than ours. We have a larger landmass, well, except for, of course, for Russia. Your question. I think I probably answered your question, except I think I forgot what your question was.
I was asking you what some of the challenges of historical
Challenges.
research.
Yes. Yeah, I would mainly image permissions would be the challenge. Yeah.
That's so interesting to me that even if you're the original photographer, you still have to get permission.
Indeed. There was one Streitwieser Trumpet Museum in Kremsegg, Austria. I traveled there 23 years ago with my photographer, John Greger, fabulous photographer. We had been covering horse-mounted military bands throughout Europe. We were guests at the Trooping of the Colour in London a number of years ago. We were at the Independence Day parade in Brussels, and then we were doing some work in Austria, and they engaged John to take photographs of all of the paintings they had of horse-mounted trumpeters and drummers and kettle drummers and so on. And they were thrilled. This is before scanning, so he was making slides. So I kept a group of slides, John kept a group of slides, and then he sent some back to the museum. Well, these 20-some years later, the museum has gone through several entities, actually has moved. Franz Streitwieser is no longer living. And actually finding where these images were, so because I needed to write saying, the slide that we took, can we now publish it? Well, we finally tracked it down through over several months to another museum, and it actually turned out fortuitous because they didn't even know why they had slides of the paintings they had. So I was able to explain to them that it was the reason they had those is because we took them.
In your opinion, how has historical research changed within the past few years?
A lot. One interesting thing, so when I was writing this book, Cold War Cadence, which is my second book, the third book, Cavalry, Trumpeters, and Kettle Drummers, had already been written. And it was sitting on a publisher's desk all during the COVID era. And I got tired of waiting, and I thought, okay, while I'm waiting on this, I'll just write another book and publish that. So I did that, and then after several emails and so on, I wasn't able to jog that publisher. They kept saying management had changed and so on. I finally pulled the book and started approaching other publishers, which turned out to be a good idea. So bringing a book back into my life that I actually wrote 5 years ago, I'm still happy with the manuscript, but I'm reminded that every year, probably every month, online databases change and are strengthened. Google has changed and is strengthened by the month, by the week, probably by the day. And so finding things is so much simpler than it used to be. I remember when I was writing my first book, I really needed one particular source. There were two copies of that source. It was an 18th century, I don't remember the book, written in the 1750s. There were two libraries in the world who had it, and neither one of them was close to me. A couple of years later, Google scanned the entire book, and then I have it downloaded for free on my laptop. That happens constantly and consistently. I'm grateful. As a historian, I do look back, and I'm a little bit stodgy. I would like much of the world to return to a different time, a glowing time in my mind, which of course it wasn't glowing. None of the times are really glowing. But I'm grateful for technology changes and so on. So finding things online in libraries changes considerably, which actually leads us into artificial intelligence, doesn't it? I got a kick. I was looking for something just this last week. I don't remember what I was looking for. I was looking for images of horse-mounted kettle drummers and trumpeters with ChatGPT. I wanted to see what ChatGPT would do. Well, ChatGPT led me to an article that had been published in 2008 that had been written by Bruce P. Gleason. And that happens a little bit. I was looking at it. There's a mounted band article on Wikipedia that had come to me through ChatGPT, and I thought, oh, thank God. Well, that Wikipedia article, again, was citing me. So I was flattered, I was honored, but it wasn't helpful.
I can imagine so, especially when you're in sort of a niche area of research.
Yes, right.
You are the leading expert, after all.
It appears so by default, yeah. I didn't know what to do with ChatGPT when I kept hearing about negatives, that students would simply be writing their papers through ChatGPT and so on. But there are things that really do come through that I hadn't thought of and I couldn't find, and thought, and images and textual histories and so on. So there are some good parts about artificial intelligence.
All right. And then can you tell us what else you have coming up on the horizon? Any new books, any new work, events?
Yes. So hopefully the publisher for this book 3, and I think it's not too soon to say that it's Indiana University Press, which is one of the top music history and military presses in the country, and I'm tickled that unless something really weird happens, it looks like they will be publishing it. And we're not quite sure when that is. I'm telling people December of 2026, but I hope it's before that. What else is on the horizon? You just asked that. After this book 3 is done, I'm also working on a book of my family history. The Gleasons leaving England in about 1647, coming to Cambridge, Massachusetts. I have all the generations. I have all of that, and now someone just needs to tell the story. They were part of the great Puritan migration.
That's fascinating.
It's pretty interesting, yeah. So other than that, that'll take me another 10 years, I suppose.
Excellent. Well, I look forward to it.
Cold War Cadence is available right down the street at Next Chapter Booksellers. So next door at Next Chapter Booksellers, and they actually did the book event release party at the Minneapolis Club in January. Have done a few things. Books are available there, and they're already autographed.
Ooh.
So they're already on the shelf there. Sound the Trumpet, Beat the Drums, my first book published by University of Oklahoma Press, is available all over the place as well. Any bookstore can order it. I'm not a big fan of steering people to the huge online groups, but you can find it there as well. The next book will be available, I'm hoping also everywhere.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Gleason.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure being here. It was an honor to be here. And we should probably say, for further information, of course, my St. Thomas website, but my own professional website is simply brucegleason.org. It's a very easy one.
Sweet. Yep. To learn more about his work, you can find him on the St. Paul campus of the University of St. Thomas. The Professor Podcast is brought to you by the St. Thomas Libraries. I'm your host, Sarah Brings. The producers and library staff are Mary Davidson and Andrea Kepi. Thank you so much for our guests and to you, our listeners.